Hi, I'm John Connon with Neural DSP. Today we're going to take a deep dive into Archetype Petrucci X. If you're a fan of progressive guitar music, then John Petrucci needs no introduction. He is the legendary Dream Theater guitarist who has inspired entire generations of players to push the boundaries of what's possible on their instrument. His supernatural skill, impeccable musicality, and flair for composing some of the world's most popular progressive music have made him a modern guitar icon. At Neural DSP, capturing John's unmistakable sound in a single plugin was one of our greatest challenges yet. We worked closely with John to deliver every nuance of his signature style, including him personally dialing in the presets, making sure you get the sounds he loves as soon as you open the plugin. I'm going to show you how to use Archetype Petrucci X to dial in a load of awesome tones. So let's dive in. So let's do a quick overview of Archetype Petrucci X. At the top of the plugin, we have our signal flow, starting at the far left with the wah and compressor page. In the pre-effects, we have an overdrive, phaser, chorus, and flanger pedal. Then we have the amp page with our 4 amps available. We have the piezo amp, a clean amp, the rhythm amp, and then the lead amp. Then we have the Cabsim page. Here you have access to the microphones and all of the impulse response options. Next to that, we then have the EQ page, where you have a dedicated 4-band semi-parametric EQ for each amplifier. Next to that, we then have the volume pedal page. And finally, we have the post effects, where we have a rack chorus, delay, and reverb. And at any point, we can change which amp we're using the amp selector at the bottom of the window. At the top, and at the bottom of our plugin window, we have access to all of the global features of Neural DSP plugins. So let's reset to the default preset and hear how it sounds. And there it is, straight out the box, that signature John Petrucci sound. Before I show you how to dial in this plugin, I'm first going to disengage the doubler and the delay so you can hear these tones without those effects. So here's the reference tone that we'll build on in the rest of the video. Now let's move on and dial in some great tones with Archetype Petrucci X. In the wah and compressor section of the plugin, we have first the wah pedal, and this is based on John Petrucci's signature wah, so you'll get that sound inherently in this wah pedal. To engage the wah, you can select this toggle switch, and you can either click the wah and drag it back and forwards, click the position dial, you could automate it within a DAW, you could assign it via MIDI to an expression pedal, and then you can control it just as you would a physical pedal. So let's disengage it for now, and here's how my guitar tone sounds. Let's bring in the wah, and I'm going to control it with my expression pedal on the floor. So this is a very expressive wah, and it instantly has that character of John Petrucci's signature wah sound. Next, let's move on to the compressor. So I'll disengage the wah, and here's how my guitar sounds without the compressor engaged. Now let's engage the compressor with its default settings. With this compressor, it's designed to be a non-transparent sounding compressor in a very musical way. It's designed to pin and compress and give sustain to your guitar sound. We have a very simple set of controls. We first have a compression dial, and as you increase this, you'll have more compression applied to your guitar signal. And it's worth noting that this has a compensated output, meaning that as you increase the compression, it's automatically going to add the makeup gain, so you don't need to increase the level as you add the compression. Here's how it sounds with the compression low at around 5 to 10%. Let's increase the compression, and we'll have generally a lot more sustain and rigidness to our dynamics. As you'll see, as we increase the compression, we have this real-time display of how much attenuation the compression is doing. And let's increase the compression all the way. Finally, we then have the level control, and this is an output for the compressor. So maybe you might want to drive the amp harder and give it more level. You can do that easily with the level dial. Let's boost it to around 75%, and now we should have a bit more saturation from the amp. As you can hear, this compressor is great for lead playing because it really clamps down on your sound and makes your dynamics nice and consistent. So now I'm just going to bring back the level of the compressor, and let's hear the wah paired with this compressor for some lead sounds. Now let's have a look at the pre-effects section. So first, here's how my guitar sounds without any of them engaged. Let's bring in the overdrive. As you can hear there, that's given this drive tone even more gain and saturation, and that's how John would use this. He'd use it as a boost for his overdriven sounds, pushing them into more aggressive rhythms or even lead-centric sounds. In terms of controls, as you'd expect on a Tube Screamer style pedal, we have tone, drive, and level. Now let's dial in this overdrive pedal to add more of a subtle boost to an already distorted rhythm sound. To do that, I'm going to bring back the drive to just under 50%, put the tone around midday, and also center the level control. Here's how it sounds with those settings. Now let's go for something warmer. I'm going to use the tone dial to shape the sound of my guitar before the amplifier section, and bringing this back will make it a lot darker. I'll also bring back the drive and level to clean up the guitar sound even more and have a less aggressive sound. Now let's push it and increase the tone and level and drive and get a nice sustaining lead tone. Now let's move on to the phaser device. Let's bypass the overdrive, and here's how the phaser sounds with everything at its default setting. On this device we have two modes, the first one being phaser, which you've just heard, and the other one being vibe. To really hear the difference between these two modes, what I'm going to do is just bring my volume back a bit because we're on quite a distorted sound at the minute. And you'll hear that Vibe has a very fast shifting kind of character to it, where it's affecting the highs and lows, whereas Phaser sounds like a general sweep in modulation. So depending on the part that you're playing and the musical application of it, you may want to choose which one of these modes suits it best. Below this, we have a rate dial that affects both of these modes, and as you increase it, the effect gets faster. Let's increase this and hear how it sounds with the rate at around 3 o'clock. Let's flip over to the phase mode. Or we could also bring this right back and have a very slow sweep to the phaser. And finally, on the vibe mode. You can really hear the difference between those two modes there. For me, I choose the phase mode for something a bit more general and sweeping sounding over the whole frequency spectrum, but then maybe use the vibe mode for something that flutters a bit more for that specific modulation effect. Now let's bypass the phaser and check out the chorus. The first control on the chorus is the rate dial, controlling the speed of the effect. Below that, we've got the depth, which controls the intensity. Next to that, on the right, we have the level control, controlling the mix of the effect. And above this, we have the mode switch, allowing us to have a normal mode, which is going to be a more traditional chorus effect. And below that, we have the tri mode, based on John Petrucci's signature chorus pedal. When dialing this pedal in, I'm going to have it in the normal mode and revert back to that. And first, let's dial in a more subtle chorus effect with a slower rate, less depth, and also bring back the level to just below 50%, so we've got a bit more of a dry mix over the wet. And that can just add a bit of extra sonic interest to a rhythm sound. Now let's go for something a lot more vivid. Let's increase the rate, depth, and also the level to 100%. And we're going to get a lot more of an in-your-face, excessive chorus tone. Now let's switch over to the tri mode. In tri-chorus mode, because we've got more voices, these settings are going to sound a lot more excessive. Because of this, these controls are going to be a lot more powerful, so we need to adjust them accordingly. So now let's bring back the rate and depth to just below 50%, keeping the level at 100%, so we've got 100% mix. And this is going to give us a much more tamer chorus sound, perfect for adding some interest to distorted rhythm parts. Now let's set the rate and depth just above midday for a much more intentional chorus tone, and let's hear how it sounds. So I think having two modes on this device makes it extremely versatile, almost like it's two different chorus pedals in one. Next, I'll bypass the chorus pedal and move on to the flanger. On this pedal, we have 4 parameters. First, we've got the rate controlling the speed of the flanger. Next to that, we then have the depth controlling the intensity of the flanger effect. Below that on the left, we then have the range, and this is going to affect the frequencies at which the flanger effect occurs. And then finally, we have feedback, and this is going to set the amount of signal fed back into the flanger input. First off, let's go for a more subtle flanger effect that's just going to add that slow sweep and add that sonic interest on top of your guitar tone. To do that, we're going to bring back the rate and also the depth. We don't want this to get too excessive. After that, the range dial, we're going to bring this back as well and have it affect more of the lower end of the frequency spectrum, just so it's not going to make the sound too brittle and sharp with this effect. And finally, the feedback, I'm also going to dial this back because it tends to get a bit cleaner and easier to control with this dial back. So here's how that sounds. So now I'm going to reset all these dials and aim for a much more intentional and vivid flanger sound. So I'm going to increase the rate and the depth. So immediately it's going to be a lot more obvious that we've got a flanger effect engaged. And then on the range, I'm going to increase this so it's going to target the higher end of the frequencies. It's going to sound a lot brighter as a result. And also on the feedback, I'm going to increase this just so there's a bit of signal fed back in and it sounds a bit more chaotic in a very pleasing and organic way. So that's the pre-effect section of Archetype Petrucci X. Here we've got 4 awesome pedals that can give you the essence of John Petrucci's sound before we've even hit the amplifiers. Now we're on to the amplifier section of Archetype Petrucci X. Here we have 4 different amplifiers. Starting off at the first amplifier, we have the piezo amp. This amp is going to be perfect for that very bright electroacoustic style tone. And if you have a piezo incorporated into your guitar, then even better. Moving on to amp number 2, we have the clean amp. And this is perfect for those crystal clean piano-like tones that John Petrucci is well known for. After this, we then have amplifier number 3, the rhythm amp. And this is great for tight, thunderous, aggressive rhythm tones with plenty of gain if you need it as well. Finally, we move on to amplifier number 4, the lead amp. And as its name suggests, this is perfect for those soaring lead tones that John Petrucci is renowned for. It's worth noting that amps 2, 3 and 4 are all based off John Petrucci's signature amp, the Mesa Boogie JP2C, and each of these amps are based on the clean, crunch and lead channels. And you may have noticed as I'm flicking through these various amplifiers, the backdrop of the plugin changes, going from daylight into outer space as we increase in gain and change the amp model. Now let's take a look at these amps in a bit more detail, starting off at amp number 1, the piezo amp. In terms of controls on this amplifier, we have standard amplifier controls such as the 3-band EQ, presence and output, but the real USP of this amplifier is at the far left where we have the body and air controls. These are where you can really dial in that electroacoustic style tone. The body control specifically allows you to alter the body resonance of your guitar, changing its character and as if it were a real acoustic guitar. So with it currently set at around 2 PM, let's bring it back and we'll have a different character of this electroacoustic sound. Let's put it around midday. And let's increase this all the way for a different body resonance character. So depending on where this is set, you'll find a preference for your specific guitar and pickup selection. Again, if you have a piezo pickup, that's going to work even better with this amplifier. But for now, I'm going to move it back to 12 o'clock and let's have a look at the air switch. This switch can add an extra layer of brightness on top of your guitar and add that air that's commonly referred to as that ultra top end. Currently, it's quite a bright guitar sound. And bringing in the air switch, it's going to become even brighter. So you can hear there that adding that air toggle switch in has brought in that inherent brightness and string noise that acoustics have in their sound. Maybe you want a slightly different character on top of this bass acoustic sound. So we have the EQ controls for this. Let's maybe add in some more bass, bring back the mids, and also the treble for now. And let's hear how that sounds. Maybe you want to really thin this out. Let's bring back the bass and middle. And also with the treble, let's increase that as well as the presence. And now we'll get an ultra bright piezo style electroacoustic sound. So it's incredibly easy to get that glassy, iconic electroacoustic sound that John Petrucci has established. Next, let's take a look at the clean amp. Starting off at the far left of the amplifier, we have the gain dial. And even if you increase this, we're still going to have loads of headroom and pristine clean tones, and it's not going to break up. So bringing this in, you can really let the amp breathe, but still retain that clean character. I'm going to reset the gain for now, put it at midday. And then we have the bright switch, which by default is engaged, and that's going to just add that very crystal clear top end. But we can take this off if we want a more rounded off, warmer clean tone. Next to this, we then have a 3-band EQ with bass, middle, and treble controls. And also we have a presence dial where you can fine tune the top end as well. Let's dial in a warmer, more rolled off clean tone. So with the bass, I'm going to increase it as well as the mids and then back off the treble and presence. And we're going to have a nice, warm, clean tone. Conversely, you may want a really nice, bright and articulate clean tone. Let's bring back the bass, mids, and then increase the treble and presence, and maybe bring in the bright switch for good measure as well. Next to the EQ section, we then have the master dial. And as you increase this, you are going to get a bit of breakup and saturation from the amp. So let's just increase it almost all the way up and hear how that sounds. Finally, we then have the output dial, which is just a master volume control for the amplifier with no effect on the tone. And after that, we then have, similar to amp 1 and all the amps in Archetype Petrucci X, we have a toggle switch if you wish to bypass or enable the amplifier. Now let's move on to amp number 3, the rhythm amp. Starting at the far left of the amplifier, we have the gain dial. And as you can see, currently it's set quite high, and we've still got more on tap if we need it. So pushing it all the way, we've got quite a lot of distortion. We could also bring this back, allowing us to have some nice, tight, single note articulate riffs. For now, I'll move this to around 3 o'clock and move on to the bite switch, where this is going to add an extra layer of bite, as you know it says in the name, but also quite a lot of aggression and push to the top end. And just for reference, here's how it sounds with the bite switch disengaged. So this can be a really handy feature to help your aggressive rhythm parts cut through the mix. Moving on, we have the tight dial. As you increase this, the sound will get tighter, as the name suggests, but what that translates to is less low end and more of a high pass filter type control. So with it all the way to the left, you'll have quite a lot of low end and you'll have a nice thick bottom end to your rhythm sound. As we bring this in, we'll control that low end and roll off the excessive low end that may get in the way of our tight rhythm parts. And here's how it sounds with the tight control maxed out. So moving on, I'm going to center the tight switch, and then we have the 3-band EQ with bass, middle and treble, but we have the addition on this amplifier of a mid-boost switch. Here's how it sounds without the mid-boost switch engaged. Now let's bring it in. Similar to the bite switch, this mid-boost toggle switch might be just what your guitar tone needs to cut through a mix. For now, I'll disengage this. And playing around with the 3-band EQ, maybe we want a nice, bright and articulate rhythm sound that's scooped in nature. So let's bring back the mids, up the treble, and bring back the bass just shy of midday. And here's how it sounds. Or we might want a nice, warm and rich rhythm sound. So let's up the mids, bring in the mid boost, bring back the treble and the bass. And now we should have a real mid-focused rhythm sound. Centering all of these EQ parameters, we then have the presence control after that. And this is going to add an extra layer of control over the upper top end. So if we increase this all the way, we're going to have a super bright and articulate top and almost increase the attack of our guitar sound. Alternatively, we could bring this back and have a more rolled off top end. Bringing this back to noon, we then have the master control. And as you increase this, you not only increase the volume, but it also embodies that character and feel of a push tube amp with richer harmonics from the power amp section. Currently, my guitar tone sounds like this. Let's push the master all the way up and hear how it sounds. And then after this, we then have the master output. Again, this has no effect on the tone of the amplifier. It's just an output control for the level. And finally, we have an on-off toggle switch if you wish to bypass or enable the amplifier. Now let's take a look at amp 4, the lead amp. In terms of controls, starting at the far left, we have the gain dial, and this is set quite high in the default preset, but we can bring this back and have slightly more articulation if we want to. So with it around 11, here's how it sounds. Or of course, we can increase this all the way and get all of the gain on tap for nice singing, liquid sustaining leads. Bringing this back a bit, we'll move on to the EQ section. So here, again, we have a 3-band EQ of bass, middle, and treble. And on top of that, we then have a saw toggle switch. So currently this has been engaged, and what this is doing is cutting the mids and giving the emphasis of a more articulate and focused lead sound. If we disengage this, we're going to have a bit more of a mid presence, which may take away from that articulation. So currently, again, with the saw switch engaged, here's how it sounds. Let's take it off. We've got a much more rolled off and warmer sound as a result. But if we bring it back in, we've got a lot more attack and definition there. Moving on, let's play about with the EQ. So we can bring in more bass if we want a warmer sound. And let's also increase the middle and bring back the treble for that. Or we could really scoop this. Let's bring back the mids, increase the gain, and also the treble. And as is the case with all of the other amplifiers, we then have a presence dial if we wish to dial in a bit more top end, and therefore articulation and pick attack as well. So here's how that sounds. After this, we then have the master dial, and similar to amp 3, as you drive this, you're going to get that warmth and aggression and general push that you get when driving a tube amplifier. So let's crank it to around 9 and hear how it sounds. So as you can hear, with that master pushed, we got even more sustain, aggression, and saturation from the amp when you push that. So after that, we then have the output. Again, this is just going to be a master level control for the amp. And finally, we have a toggle switch if you wish to bypass or enable the amplifier. So that's the amplifier section for Archetype Petrucci X. 4 faithfully recreated amplifiers dialed in by the man himself, while versatile enough to create your own sounds. This Cabsim section allows you to move 6 virtual microphones around the cabinet, which changes aesthetically as you switch between the various amplifiers. These impulse responses were meticulously captured by Jimmy T at Dream Theater HQ. In terms of the interface, we have controls for the left and right microphones on the cabinet, where you can adjust the position, distance, level, and panning of each microphone. And on top of that, we also have a room section where you can add in a close, mid, or far room reverb sound. Just as a quick note, when using the piezo amp, you'll see that you don't have access to both the Cabsim section and the EQ page, as these are bypassed when using the piezo amp. So let's dial in some sounds using these microphone options. In Archetype Petrucci X, we have unique mic options for this plugin, chosen by John Petrucci himself. We have a dynamic 2500, dynamic 421, condenser FET 301, condenser 2500, ribbon 353, and a ribbon VR2. And as usual, you can also load your own custom impulse responses if you wish. So let's hear these different microphone options. Starting with the dynamic 2500, I'm just going to bypass the far right mic, so we're just hearing the one microphone. And here's how the dynamic 2500 sounds. Dynamic 421. Condenser FET 301. Condenser 2500. The ribbon 353. And finally, the ribbon VR2. Now let's dial in a couple of sounds. The first one I'm going to go for is a very tight and matter-of-fact rhythm sound with a bit of room reverb for some realism. And I'm going to bypass the second mic and choose a dynamic 2500 mic, leave the position and distance and level the same for now. Let's hear how it sounds. Let's maybe scroll through, see how the dynamic 421 is. I really like how that sounds, so maybe just bring it slightly out from the center of the cone. And I'll leave the distance at 0 because I want it to be nice, up and close to the cab. I'll leave the panning in the center and the level where it is. And let's engage the room. Let's hear how it sounds at a close setting at around -40. So that's still quite subtle. Let's bring up the level. Let's maybe increase the distance. Let's go on mid. bring up the level even more. Maybe try the fast setting. We could afford to bring up the level even more. Let's go back to mid. So I'm still going for something quite tight. I'm going to bring the level back down. Let's try that. Now that's sounding great, but let's add to this by bringing in a second microphone. And for this tone, I'm gonna have a nice wide ambient rhythm sound with stereo mics left and right. So the first mic I've dialed in, I'm just gonna hard pan left for now, and then engage the right mic options, pan it hard right, and add in the room and have a slightly different setting, just so there's some stereo difference. And scroll through these different mic options, starting on the same mic, and then we can pick one that complements it on the right side. So there I landed on the condenser FET 301 because it had that high end that you get from a condenser with that larger frequency spectrum it can pick up. So it had that sizzle that the Dynamic 421 didn't necessarily have. And it's just made it feel nice and wide with a kind of different profile on either side and slightly different settings on the room mics as well, has just given it that stereo width and ambience and life. If you were using IRs in this page that weren't necessarily agreeing and you had a bit of phase cancellation, at the bottom of each of these microphone selections and options, you have a phase invert switch where you can invert the phase of either of them, and that should sort that out. That's the Cabsim section of Archetype Petrucci X, where you have 6 mic options chosen by John himself, as well as studio level control over where you place them. Now let's move on to the EQ page of the plugin. For each amp, we have a dedicated 4-band semi-parametric EQ, now with high and low pass filters. With a semi-parametric EQ, you select the frequency that you want to adjust, and then with the gain dial, either increase or decrease that frequency. However, the width of the band, otherwise known as the Q, is fixed. Now let's dial in a sound for the rhythm amp using its dedicated EQ. Here's how my tone sounds with the current EQ settings. As you'll see, the EQ is already dialed in by John Petrucci to match this amplifier. You may want to dial in a slightly different sound, maybe start again by rolling off some of the low end with the high pass filter to around 80 Hertz. And then let's dip somewhere around 150 just to get rid of some boxy low mids. And John's already pulled out around 3 dB of 260 to get even more low mids out. And he's boosted around 3K. I'm just gonna go up to around 4 and dip that slightly and get rid of that whistly high mid that can get kind of overbearing in the mix. He's also taken off around 2 to 3 dB of 13K. What I'm going to do is just use the low pass filter to take off the ultra top end, just so it's not too sharp. Here's how the amp sounds with no EQ. And with. Both of them sound great and can work in different scenarios, but maybe in a mix where there's a kick drum and a bass guitar going on, you might not want all of the low end and some of those other frequencies that we've notched out. So that's the EQ section of the plugin, where we have these very accessible and easy to use controls to fine tune your sound. Now we're on to the volume pedal section of the plugin, where we have a volume pedal as John Petrucci would use in his rig. We have one control here, a midpoint control, and you can use this to set a different volume curve to the pedal. You may want it to be more of an immediate volume increase or more of a slower one. To demonstrate this, I've assigned the volume pedal to a MIDI expression pedal on the floor. And with the midpoint at 0, it's going to have a much slower increase in volume as I depress the pedal. However, as I increase this to 50%, which is all the way up, it's going to have a much more responsive and immediate increase in volume. And you can use this to fine-tune it to the best feel and response that you're after. Typically, a volume pedal would be at the start of a signal chain. However, having it at this point of the signal chain, like John Petrucci does in his rig, allows you to achieve those atmospheric soundscape type swells that John Petrucci is known for. To demonstrate this, I've activated the post effects, so let's hear this in action. So there, you can really tell how effective it is to have a volume pedal at this point of the signal chain. Now we're on to the post effects, and as you can see, we have 3 rack devices here to imitate John's rig setup. We have a chorus, delay, and a reverb. Starting with the chorus, let's turn it on and hear everything in its default setting. The first thing to note here is that this is the second chorus in Archetype Petrucci X. The first one, in the pre-effects, acted as a mono chorus going into the amplifier stage, whereas this one acts as a stereo chorus in the post effects. As a result of this, using the chorus in the post effects allows you to widen the stereo image of your guitar sound. In terms of controls, we start off with the mix. You've just heard it at around 50%. We can bring this back and have a more subtle chorus effect. Or alternatively, we can really increase this. Let's go all the way to 100%, and you'll get a very vivid, wide stereo chorus sound. Similar to the first chorus, on this second chorus we have 2 different modes. The first mode on the toggle switch is vintage mode, that's what you've been hearing, and the alternative one is spatial. Let's hear spatial mode. Go back to vintage. So you can hear there's a character shift between these two modes. Vintage staying true to its name, and then spatial having a more modern, wider, slower rate kind of sound to it. And it's really handy having these two modes to dial in a specific character if you're playing a part that requires it. Next up, we have rate and depth dials, controlling the speed and intensity of the chorus effect. To demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is just bring the rate down and increase the depth, just so we can hear the full extent of the vintage mode first. Now let's hear that in spatial mode. So with the current controls, we've got a nice wide stereo field without it being too overwhelming. Now let's increase the rate and get a more vivid chorus effect. We could push this even further. Now let's hear vintage mode in its most vivid form with all the controls all the way up. So now let's rein this back a bit and dial in a more modest chorus sound for a single note part. Let's keep the mix relatively high. Put it into spatial mode. Bring the rate down and keep the depth fairly high as well. And then we'll still get an obvious chorus effect, adding some width and interest to the sound without it getting too overbearing. So that covers it for the rack chorus. Let's disengage this and move on to the delay, and let's hear it with all of its default settings. So there we've got a great stereo tape delay sound. And if you're familiar with our plugins, you'll recognize a lot of the parameters and controls on this rack delay unit, but you'll also see the addition of 3 new controls at the far right. Here we have crystals, tape, and mod. In that delay sound I just played, you would have heard the tape effect, but for now I'm just gonna bypass that and bring the mix all the way off and focus on crystals first. So crystals adds a timed delay repeat an octave up of your drive signal. So currently with it off, you're not going to hear anything. But if I bring in crystals to 50% and play something melodic, it adds a very spontaneous and organic sounding timed repeat an octave up above what you're playing. And we could bring this to 100% and it's going to become a lot more obvious. This crystals effect works great on clean sounds. So briefly, I'm just gonna select the clean amplifier and play something with the crystals effect still on 100%. Now I'm just going to go back to the lead amplifier and we'll move on to the tape control. So this will add tape saturation and darken up and slightly distort your delay repeats, but not your dry signal. So with tape off, here's how the delay sounds. I can increase this to around 50% and we'll start to introduce that tape effect. Now let's push it to 100% and hear the full intensity of the tape effect. Moving on, let's bring this tape control back to 0 and move on to the mod dial. This will add modulation and therefore pitch variation to your delay repeats, not your dry signal. So let's bring this to around 50%. And now at 100%. This modulation dial can be really great if you want to introduce a chorus-like effect to your wet delay repeats. So I'm going to bring the mod dial back, and now let's dial in some different sounds. First one I'm going to go for is a very dark, rich and warm tape saturated delay with a medium to long tail. So I'm going to start off at the far left and increase the mix to just over 50% so you can hear it. And then I'm going to keep quite a lot of the low end in. But with the high pass, I'm just going to roll the super low end out just so it doesn't get overbearing. And similarly with the low pass, I'm going to roll quite a lot of that off because I want it to be quite dark with not much high end information. Having these high and low pass filter controls are really handy, especially when dialing in delay repeats, just to fine tune the low and high end of the signal. Now let's talk about the sync switch. And here we have a 3-way toggle switch for 3 different modes: free, app, or DAW when using it in-ear DAW, and tap. In free mode, the time of the delay repeats is set by the dials for time L and time R, as shown in milliseconds on the digital display. In app mode, the delay repeats will sync to the tempo of the app, or when using it in a DAW, it will sync to the tempo of the DAW. And we can control the subdivisions of the delay repeats using the time left and time right dials. And the third mode is tap, where we now have access to the tap tempo button, where we can tap in a tempo for the delay repeat time. And again, the subdivisions are set by the time left and right dials. For this sound, I'm going to switch it to free mode and alter the time of my left and right delay to the approximate values that I'm going for. And there is the option using the mode switch to have just a single delay as opposed to a dual stereo delay. In single mode, you'll see we only have access to the time left dial to control this single delay repeat. But in dual mode, you'll see we have options for the stereo delay controls, one of which is crossfeed. And this introduces an overlapping type effect where the delay repeats are fed into one another. So without crossfeed in, here's how it sounds. Now I'll bring in crossfeed to around 50%. And now let's hear crossfeed at 100%. And this can be useful just to add an extra bit of spatial interest to your delay sounds. For now, I'm going to bring this back to just below 50% and move on to the feedback dial. And this is going to control the amount of delay repeats. With feedback, I want a few more repeats than we've currently got, so I'm just going to bump this up slightly. Now, with the final 3 controls, I'm not going to have any crystals in the sound because I want this to be quite a dark, warm delay tone. Next, we have tape, and I'm going to want to bring this in. For now, here's how it sounds without. But I'm going to bring this in because I want it to really saturate and darken up the delay repeats even more. So here's how it sounds at around 3 o'clock. So that's really adding that dark and warm character that I was going for. And to add on that and add a bit more interest, I'm going to add the mod. So this is going to add some pitch variation to the delay repeats and just give it some more character. So here's how it sounds again with that set around 3 o'clock. So I'm really happy with that. That's a really nice, warm, mellow delay sound that's going to really complement a bright solo tone. Now let's go for something a bit more traditional. I'm going to go for a very bright digital delay sound that's utilizing all of the cool effects that we've got here, like the crystals and the high fidelity of a digital delay. So I'm going to start off at the mix, bring this back slightly because it's going to be very bright. I don't want it to be too overbearing. I'm going to roll off quite a lot of the low ends to keep it nice and thin. And with the low pass, I'm going to bring in all of that high-end information again, just so we can get that articulation of a digital delay. I'm going to change it to app mode and have a quarter note on the left and a dotted eighth on the right, just so we've got some rhythmic interplay there. I'm going to bring the crossfeed down, just so we retain that rhythmic variation on the left and right. And therefore, I'm going to keep it in dual mode as well. With the feedback, I'm going to bring this down, just so the delay repeats don't fall over each other. I'm going to bring in the crystals, because I really want this to kind of poke through the time delay repeats. So again, not having too much of it, I've got it just below 50%. With the tape, I'm going to bring this back a bit. I quite like how it rounds off and warms up the tail a bit, so I'm going to have it in only at around 10%. And then for modulation, I'm going to bring this back again, just for a little bit of it, at around 10%. So here's how that sounds. So with just a few tweaks, that's a completely different sound we can get out of this extremely versatile delay unit. Next, let's disengage the delay and move on to the rack reverb unit. Here's how it sounds with all of its default settings. And instantly there, we've put our guitar in a space. And in terms of controls on this reverb, we start off with a mix. Currently, it's set quite modestly, but we could bring this up and have a greater sense of the space we're in. So this is just at around 50%. We're going to have a greater mix of the reverb. And as you can tell, this is a very powerful control. We're around 50%, and that's still quite a large mix. You could, of course, increase this all the way and get a very overwhelming reverb sound. For now, I'm going to keep this at around 10 to 20%. A standout feature of this reverb is the shimmer. So for this, it can add an octave above tail to your dry signal. So currently it's off and it sounds like this. But if I toggle on the shimmer switch, it'll bring the effect in. And this is a really cool feature if you want to add some atmosphere and otherworldliness to your reverb sound. For now, I'll toggle this off and demonstrate the pre-delay. So you can see the pre-delay almost like a period of time between your dry guitar signal and when the reverb starts. So currently this is set at around 10 o'clock. We can increase this and we're going to have a larger amount of time between when we play the guitar and when the reverb happens. And that will give the illusion of a larger space. If we bring this back, it's going to sound like we're in a smaller space with quicker reflections. Next up, we have the decay, and this is going to control the length of the reverb tail. Currently it's set at 50%, and it sounds like quite a large space, but we could bring this back to around 10 or 20%, and it's going to sound like we're in a much smaller space with a shorter reverb tail. Alternatively, we could really bring this up and have long, drawn-out ambient soundscape type reverb tones. For now, I'll leave this at around 50%. I'll move on to the high and low pass. And these can be really great, again, just to dial in and fine tune the low and high end of your reverb tail. Especially with larger spaces and a longer decay, you don't want all that low end getting in the way of what you're playing. So you may want to roll off the low end with the high pass, and it's just going to clear up the very bottom end, which is great for chord playing. We could thin this out all the way and just get the very top end of our reverb sound. For now, I'll bring this back. And conversely, we can do this with the low pass as well. Maybe we want a darker reverb sound. We could roll off the top end, bring it to around 40–50%. And make it even mellower. Let's bring it off all the way. So we have loads of scope there to really fine tune and dial in our reverb sounds. Next, let's dial in a very drawn out, ambient, shimmery reverb tail. So I'm going to keep the mix relatively high. Again, not too much so it gets overbearing, but at around 40–50%. I'm going to put shimmer on, so that can really shine in this, and a bit of pre-delay, just so we have the illusion of a big space. I'm going to increase the decay. I'm going to roll off quite a lot at the low end, because I don't want it to get on top of itself if I play different chords. And I'm going to keep quite a lot of the high end in, but not so much that it gets a bit ear-piercing. So let's hear how this sounds. So I really like that. It's good fun to play around with that dynamic shimmer sound, and utilizing the high and low pass controls is especially effective when using the shimmer. So now I'm going to dial in a nice warm and mellow cloud-like tone underneath a lead sound. So I'm going to increase the mix, take the shimmer off, put the pre-delay almost at 0, so it's like an instant reverb tail, and I'm going to increase the decay, bring in a bit of the low end just so it's nice and warm, but again, not overbearing. And then roll off even more of the top end because we don't want any of that high end coming through. And actually, I might increase the mix a bit more. So here's how it sounds. So now we've heard what the rack, chorus, delay, and reverb can do in isolation. Now let's dial in a sound using all three of them. So firstly, I'm going to bypass the reverb and engage the chorus and start with that. I'm going to keep the mix relatively high because I want an obviously modulated chorus guitar tone. I'm going to keep it in spatial mode, put the rate just below midday, and depth at around 3 o'clock, just so we've got an obvious chorus effect on our guitar signal. Next, with the delay, I'm going to go for an obviously present delay tone, but again, nothing too overbearing, so let's engage it. With the mix, bring it around 40%, take quite a lot of the low end and high end out, just so it sits nicely in the mid-range. I'm going to keep it on the application's tempo with a quarter note and dotted eighth delay. Bring the feedback down just so it doesn't get in the way if I do any kind of non-diatonic chord changes, so there's no clashes. Bring in a bit of the crossfeed just for a bit of interest. Have a subtle amount of crystals. Bring in the tape to warm it up, and also bring in the mod just to add, again, a chorus-like effect and give it that modulation. And now I'm going to put it in a space. Let's engage the reverb. Bring the mix back a bit. Engage the shimmer. Add a bit of pre-delay to give the impression of a larger space that we're in. Bring back the decay. Roll off a bit of the low end and bring the high end just in a bit, just for a bit of glisten and top end for the reverb tail. And here's how it sounds. That covers it for the post effects of Archetype Petrucci X. In their own right, these devices are all extremely powerful, but when paired together, they can yield some incredibly interesting results. John Petrucci uses these effects in his extensive catalogue of music, and you can now have hands-on access to these effects when dialing in your own guitar tones. Now let's check out some of the artist and factory presets included in Archetype Petrucci X. First, we'll take a look at some of the presets John has personally created for his most iconic tracks. We can load these from the drop-down menu in the preset manager. Each one is meticulously dialed in for every section of the track, so you can easily toggle effects on or off, even if they're disabled by default, to nail every nuance of his signature sound. So let's start with the preset for As I Am. This would be a good opportunity to demonstrate how you can access other tones from the track within the same preset. So currently I'm on the default preset for Pull Me Under, and it's the clean intro. What I'm going to do though is go over to the post effects, bypass the chorus and delay, and then switch over to amp number 2, and we should have the distorted rhythm sound. Now let's hear the lead tone from Count of Tuscany. So again, from the default preset, I'm going to go onto the post effects, disable the chorus, engage the reverb, leave the delay on, and then on the amps, go on to the lead amp, and we should have our lead tone. So those were some of the presets created by John. It's amazing to have instant access to so many of the sounds from his tracks. Now let's check out some of the other factory and artist presets. That wraps up our deep dive into Archetype Petrucci X. I hope you've enjoyed exploring all the ways you can use this plugin to recreate his iconic guitar tones and get creative in designing your own sounds. If you're ready to start playing through Archetype Petrucci X today, head on over to neuraldsp.com to start your free trial. I'm John Connon, thanks for watching.